That's okay with the witnesses. Again, if you do have to catch a flight or leave, no, absolutely do what you have to do for sure. But it's important to hear, and we thank you for tolerating the
gavel.
basically what's happening here. So I guess we'll start this meeting. Got to do the gavel, as the clerk tells me. So we'll start off with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Nick Schultz, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honorable members of the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Nick Schultz, and I am Vice President of Pipeline Regulation for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. My association represents the upstream oil and gas industry in Canada, the folks who explore for and produce Canada's oil and natural gas. Our members produce about 80% of Canada's oil and natural gas. In an industry that invests multiple billions of dollars every year into the Canadian economy. Access to export markets for our products is vital to our industry and also vital to the Canadian economy that benefits from the activity that our industry creates. Operation of free markets is a cornerstone principle for our association, and free market principles are the foundation for free trade. So fundamentally, we are very much aligned with the operation of free markets and free trade agreements. When it comes to energy, the energy chapter that's in NAFTA does date back to the original 1987 Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and the foundation for that free trade agreement is a fact that sometimes is overlooked, but is nonetheless important, which is that both countries, Canada and the U.S., had already moved to free market policies for energy markets in the mid-'80s, and the free trade agreement then built on that in respect of energy. And today, both countries still operate on the basis of market-oriented energy policies, and Mexico, which joined the free trade area in 1994, has recently significantly liberalized its energy markets, responding to the incentive that NAFTA provided it. So from our perspective, we would see that NAFTA has been beneficial to all three countries, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The expectation of mutual benefit that drives nations to enter into free trade agreements is the reality of free trade in respect of energy, and we would say in free trade in general. And since 1987 and since 1994, the economies of all three countries have become even more interconnected and even more integrated, and so the logic of a North American free trade zone is even more compelling now than it was 30 or 35 years ago. Free trade has done exactly what one would expect with regard to energy. The energy pie has grown, and all three partners to NAFTA have shared in that growth. We did provide to the clerk copies of my remarks, which have some data, and I'm just skipping over that in the interest of time. But I would point out that U.S. oil production has grown dramatically in recent years and is back to 1970 levels. U.S. natural gas production has grown enormously in the last 10 years, and markets that Canadian oil and natural gas producers served in the U.S. Have been displaced by domestic production in the U.S., and in fact in Ontario and Quebec, significant amounts of natural gas are being imported to supply Canadian consumers. So U.S. natural gas producers have benefited from the market access that has been created by free trade, and U.S. oil producers now are the dominant supplier to the Eastern Canadian refineries that rely on imported crude oil. So again, there has been benefit there. If we were to speak about the room for improvement, we would begin with what other witnesses have said to you, which is do no harm. The free trade agreement has been beneficial, and while there is always room for improvement, the starting point should be do no harm. and we should be sure to preserve the basic building blocks of free trade agreements, national treatment, and redress for individual investors. And I would note that in regard to the energy chapter, it is not the business community in any of the three countries that is seeking change. So from a Canadian perspective, when it comes to improvement, the area of improvement would be around rules of origin. A very liquid natural gas market has evolved in North America in the last 30 years. One of the challenges of that liquidity is that it does not marry up easily with the complex rules of origin. So if we are to renegotiate, we need to address that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And again, to the witnesses, again, as you see people wandering the room, we're just coming out of the House of Commons. I just want to welcome you here. I didn't take the appropriate chance to do that. I do have a couple hand signals. If you see me go like this, that means you got 1 minute left. And if you see me go like this, that means you've gone over your 5 minutes and I'm getting close to cutting you off. So just so you're aware of what those are. So we'll go on to our next witness. It's the Canadian Labour Congress and Angela McEwen. You have the floor for 5 minutes, Angela.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be here on behalf of the Canadian Labour Congress. We represent 3.3 million members across Canada. We bring together Canada's national and international unions, along with provincial and territorial federations of labour and 130 district labour councils, whose members work in virtually all sectors of the Canadian economy, in all occupations, and in all parts of Canada. As I always do, I have to say up front, the labor movement is keenly aware that trade is and always has been an important feature of the Canadian economy. Our jobs depend on trade. We understand that all governments will have an interest in fostering open trade. We feel that the distributional impacts from trade and investment agreements have long been ignored. We're told that trade deals will have winners and losers, but don't worry, we'll compensate the losers. In my opinion, the failure to compensate those who have been negatively impacted by trade shocks has led to growing inequality, especially regional, and a nationalist sentiment among those people who've been poorly affected. And this has happened in many developed nations. It's not unique to Canada. In fact, Canada has been somewhat protected because of our strong social safety net. More than 20 years after signing the North American Trade Agreement, the ways it has failed working Canadians are very clear. Canadians were told it would create good jobs, shared prosperity, and a better future for working people. Instead, it has undermined secure, well-paid employment, devastated manufacturing and processing industries, and the communities that depend on them. While there has been increased trade and economic growth, the benefit has gone to large corporations and investors, leaving workers behind. NAFTA doesn't just govern trade, but empowers foreign investors to sue Canadian governments, threatening public services and limiting the ability of governments to regulate in the public interest. This so-called free trade agreement has not fostered fair or balanced trade, in our opinion. And one of the reasons for that is because trade agreements have left a gap. The governance gap in national legislation has become inadequate. The lack of transparency and asymmetrical relationships in global supply chains, combined with a competition among low-income nations for foreign investment and jobs, actually undercuts the ability of free trade to be fair. For example, only 1% of Mexican workers belong to a democratic union. Most workers in Mexico are covered by so-called protection contracts, agreements between the company and a company-approved union. Workers don't even have the right to see the collective agreement. If they try to vote out that union and vote in another union, there are often, at best, they're ignored, and at worst, their lives are in danger. The solution to this, we feel, is to have a parallel approach. Along with trade agreements, focus on strengthening ILO conventions. Canada has just announced that we're going to ratify the Core Convention 98, which is the right to organize and collective bargaining. Neither Mexico or the United States has ratified this agreement. We've also pushed the Canadian government to ratify Governance Convention 81, which is the Labor Inspection Convention, which Canada, the United States, and Mexico have all not ratified. This convention would help ensure that labor standards, which we've agreed to in the core conventions, have labor inspectors which can enforce and make sure that workers in all countries have access to their rights under those core conventions. We would also encourage the government to look at due diligence for Canadian companies and funding agencies, similar to legislation that was recently passed in France, to look at a framework for transnational bargaining to allow unions to represent workers in multiple countries, and to work within the ILO and OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, and strengthening Canada's national contact point. We're glad to hear that the Canadian government has stated publicly that it's willing to walk away from a deal that's not in Canada's best interest. We think it's time to take a new approach to trade that puts the interests of working people and the environment first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, and you well within your 5 minutes, so you get the award today for being. It's a pin or something, I'm sure. We'll move on to our next witness, Joseph Gallimberti. Joseph, how do I pronounce your last name?
Gallimberti.
I know you for years, and I can't pronounce it right for some reason. Please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to appear today in this important study. Much appreciated. The Canadian Steel Producers Association is the national voice of Canada's $14 billion primary steel production industry. Canadian steel producers are integral to the automotive, energy, construction, and other demanding supply chains in Canada. In that context, we seek to work with governments and industry partners to advance public policies that enable a globally competitive business environment. Before I directly address the committee's fundamental questions as regards industry priorities, I'd like to first provide a little context as regards the mutually beneficial nature of our NAFTA relationship in steel, focusing principally on the relationship between Canada and the U.S. Canada and the U.S. enjoy a balanced and complementary trade relationship in steel, founded on fair market principles. In 2016, over 10 million tons of steel with a market value of over $8.8 billion U.S. dollars was traded between our two countries. Canada shipped $4.4 billion U.S. to the United States. The U.S. shipped $4.45 billion to Canada. Steel continues to be a major export commodity from the U.S. into Canada. In 2016, 50% of U.S. steel exports came here, accounting for about 30% of our domestic market. Additionally, Canadian steel producers buy significant raw materials from the United States. To be specific, $1.5 billion U.S. worth of iron ore, bituminous coal, steel scrap, zinc, and other metals were purchased by companies for processing last year. So beyond the value of those commodities, there's also significant economic activity generated through the mining, recovery, and transportation of those raw materials. Several of our producers maintain facilities and employment in multiple NAFTA jurisdictions, and the shared profitability of those facilities supports investment across the various companies. Since NAFTA entered into force, steel trade in products between NAFTA countries has increased by 117.2%. And the vast majority of North American steel exports are made within the region. 97% of Canadian steel exports are to the United States and Mexico, 90% of U.S. steel exports to Canada and Mexico, and 76% of Mexican steel exports are to Canada and the U.S. So recognizing the strategic value of steel production to the NAFTA region, in 2003, the NAFTA governments created the North American Steel Trade Committee, which coordinates government and industry actions on joint enforcement and continued growth and prosperity in steel in the region. This brings both government and industry representatives together from the three countries to discuss policy priorities and competitiveness. As this committee so recently heard, as part of its study on the Canadian steel industry's ability to compete, growth in excess capacity from jurisdictions where state control and ownership are prevalent is both unsustainable and irresponsible. NAFTA governments and industries share a fundamental belief that urgent and substantive multilateral action is required to address causes and consequences of global overcapacity, and that is why we continue to support the efforts of NAFTA governments through the G20 OECD Global Forum on Steel Overcapacity, sharing an expectation that there will eventually be a permanent reduction in overcapacity. But in defending against unfairly traded imports for the time being, we share the challenges of our counterparts in the U.S. and Mexico. These detrimental impacts are artificially suppressing our prices and harming North American workers. So we work cooperatively to ensure that policies and actions in all three NAFTA countries are closely aligned and that we are responsibly defending the region from unfair trade. We generally view NAFTA as having been a successful agreement, and to that end, though after 23 years we believe that it can be modernized. To that end, we would point to the strengthening of rules of origin, the promotion of trade enforcement, cooperation and coordination, the establishment of enforceable currency disciplines, the establishment of disciplines of the conduct of state-owned enterprises, and the elimination of burdensome customs procedures and upgrades to border infrastructure. In closing, I would note that before a formal NAFTA renegotiation takes place, it is critical that Canada can secure national consideration in the Department of Commerce's ongoing Section 232 National Security Investigation on the imports of steel, in the Department of Commerce's process on the construction of pipelines using domestic steel and iron, and also as regards the Department of Commerce in their ongoing process regarding the enforcement of current Buy American policies. In each instance, the government should continue to rigorously defend the interests of Canadian steel producers and steel workers to ensure no adverse or unintended consequences occur as a result of direct action taken by the U.S. Without positive outcomes on these three significant initiatives, any gains possibly associated with the NAFTA renegotiation quickly become moot. In closing, I'd like to say that NAFTA has been a positive agreement for the North American steel industry and our customers, and we
I'm
collectively
going to have to
welcome
cut
the
you off
opportunity
there.
to work.
Sorry. We're
Yes,
30
I'm just
seconds
wrapping
over,
up.
so
Okay.
thanks, Joseph.
Yeah.
We'll move on to our next witnesses from the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, Bob Masterson and David Podruzny. Did I get it right, David? The floor is yours, gentlemen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. It is an honor to meet with this committee. As you know, international trade has certainly moved to the forefront of both policymakers and the business community's mind. Just for some background, the chemistry industry is a vital component of the Canadian economy. We're the fourth largest manufacturing sector with about $53 billion of annual shipments. And many of us don't give much thought to the role of chemicals in the economy, but more than 96% of all manufactured goods are touched by the business of chemistry, and that, of course, includes the key sectors of the Canadian economy: energy, transportation, agri-food, minerals and mining, just to name a few. In my brief time with you today, we have just 3 messages we want to share with you. First, the global chemistry industry is a large, fast-growing industry and has deeply interconnected patterns of trade. Annually, global chemical trade is at about $5 trillion, with growth rates far in excess of global GDP, and we're looking for that number to reach $6 trillion by 2020. And to put that number into context, Canada currently occupies about 2% of global production. 3 major trends that are driving that increase in chemistry demand: of course, global population growth, the pursuit of quality of life, middle-class lifestyles by the growing populations in Asia, and also the aggressive pursuit of more sustainable outcomes in terms of clean air, clean water, clean energy by all citizens of the planet. And this is the key. Those trends all together mean that you're looking at a chemistry industry that will nearly triple by 2050, which is not that far away. Already today, chemicals are amongst the highest traded commodities worldwide, and about 40% of global chemical production is shipped internationally. So it's clear that free and fair trade in chemicals will remain of vital importance for this industry to realize the contributions that are being demanded from it in the coming decades. My second point, and I guess this perhaps echoes a bit of what was said by Cap, the Canadian position within this highly integrated global sector is currently at an inflection point. Our sector is highly integrated with the global industry. We export about $40 billion worth of our products each year. That's second only to transportation equipment in the manufacturing space. On the other hand, we import about $50 billion. When we look at the United States, our trade is almost completely balanced with about $30 billion of exports and $33 billion of imports. We can't take that balance for granted, however, and in particular, the abundant availability of low-cost natural gas in recent years has meant that we've seen over 300 global-scale investments in the chemistry industry in the United States, totaling about $250 billion of new plant and equipment. And that certainly is going to put pressure on Canada's historical export share into that jurisdiction. the same time, we know the new administration in Washington is embarked on a very aggressive round of reforms in areas from not only trade policy, but also taxation policy and regulatory policy. And we don't know, none of us here know the outcomes of any of those specific initiatives, but what we do know is the United States is determined to make a more competitive business climate for its manufacturing and private sector businesses in the coming years. So taken together and absent a coordinated and appropriate response from Canadian policymakers, Canada will continue to struggle to attract its historical share of investment into the chemistry sector. So my third point is a bit more hopeful. There are opportunities to change the current pathway and allow the chemistry sector to flourish and make important contributions to both the domestic economy and the global environment. We in Canada have an embarrassing richness of the lowest carbon chemical feedstocks on the planet, and for Canada to seize the opportunity and attract a fair share of significant investments that are taking place in that sector, we need to focus on three priorities. Number one, we have to be prepared to negotiate a modernized NAFTA. You've received a copy of a tripartite statement that our association, along with our U.S. and Mexican counterparts, published in early March. And to our knowledge, we're the only sector that has reached a consensus opinion across all three jurisdictions on our positions for NAFTA negotiations. And we continue to delve into the details of what we're looking for. In brief, NAFTA has allowed for duty-free trade of all chemical products. That's incentivized the growth of complex supply chains and helped lower the cost of chemical production and strengthen the sector overall in the global marketplace. We support the whole of government approach to NAFTA negotiations the federal government has embarked upon and continue to offer our support through established channels. We do see an opportunity. NAFTA was developed in the early 90s. There's aspects that can be negotiated and strengthened. And certainly the first of those would be to maintain current trade free for qualified products, improvements of rules of origin, requirements, customs facilitation, and also to enhance regulatory cooperation and harmonization amongst the jurisdictions. And I think being told that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Masterson. I appreciate that. And we'll move on to the Council of the Great Lakes. Mark Fisher, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Vice Chairs Hoback and Ramsey. Honourable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As Vice Chair Hoback had mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Council of the Great Lakes Region. We were established in 2013 as a binational nonprofit, working with government, business, private sector, and nonprofit associations to deepen the U.S.-Canada relationship, but also find new ways of harnessing the region's economic strengths. My remarks today will focus on three elements: the importance of a strong North American economy, the significance of the Canada-U.S. Economic partnership, and the critical role that cross-border regions, economies like the Great Lakes region have in strengthening their competitiveness and long-term prosperity. I hope they're helpful as you deliberate on Canada's trade and investment relationships with the United States and Mexico. Let me say first that North American trade and investment cemented in NAFTA is a work in progress politically and economically. From a macroeconomic perspective, NAFTA has been very beneficial to all three countries. In fact, as you've probably heard over the last couple of weeks, overall merchandise trade between the Canada, U.S., and Mexico has more than tripled since 1993. Taking a deeper look during this time, U.S.-Mexico trade grew substantially according to the U.S. Congressional Research Service. U.S. goods exports, for example, increased from $40.6 billion in 1993 to over $230 billion in 2016, an increase of 455%. Whereas U.S. good imports from Mexico increased from $40 billion in 1993 to $290 billion in 2016, an increase of 637%. As a result, there's a modest trade deficit that exists between the U.S. and Mexico, roughly about $63 billion. Conversely, the U.S. Congressional Service in a recent NAFTA study showed that the U.S. had a services trade surplus of roughly $10 billion in 2016 with Mexico. The growth in merchandise trade between Canada and the United States, however, has been more subdued. U.S. exports to Canada are up 165% from 1993 levels, growing from $100 billion in 1993 to $270 billion in 2016. While U.S. imports from Canada are up 150% from 1993 levels, growing from $110 billion in 1993 to $278 billion in 2016. As you will notice, a modest trade deficit between the U.S. and Canada exists, which is principally due to fluctuating energy prices. And again, like Mexico, based on USTR figures, the U.S. has a services trade surplus with Canada, which in 2016 was approximate to about $25 billion. Finally, with respect to Canada and Mexico, even though bilateral trade is growing, the flow of trade is seriously imbalanced. In 2016, Canada imported roughly $33 billion worth of goods from Mexico, while Mexico only imported roughly $8 billion in goods from Canada. Taken together, this snapshot of continental and bilateral trade shows why NAFTA is such a complicated story. On the one hand, NAFTA accelerated market liberalization, private sector modernization, and public sector reform in Mexico. On the other hand, NAFTA stretched commerce and supply chains from the north to the south, redirecting factory jobs and investment. So in many respects, ever since NAFTA was enacted, the continent has been operating at two speeds, largely in Mexico's favor. The latter shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, and seeing Mexico succeed has short and long-term economic benefits. Better workplaces and wages, better education, better government, better security. But ask a factory worker in Ontario, Quebec, Wisconsin, or Ohio, and they will tell you that adjusting to NAFTA and Mexico's rise has been tough. A lot of people feel left out in today's climate of borderless trade, investment, and mobility, and a growing number of people are feeling left behind as the digital or knowledge economy takes hold. That's what I'm hearing and seeing across the binational Great Lakes region, which spans 2 provinces, 8 states, home to 107 million Canadians and Americans. With economic output estimated at $6 trillion in 2016, the region accounts for 30% of combined Canadian and U.S. economic activity. And if it were a country, this region would equate to the third largest economy in the world, behind the U.S. and China. So when we look at NAFTA modernization, you can probably gather that it's a frightening prospect, but also a significant opportunity for the Great Lakes region. If we can't find a way in these negotiations to optimize cross-border supply chains and transportation networks, we'll lose an important opportunity to enhance our shared competitiveness. If we can't find ways within these negotiations to share traditional and low-carbon energy resources, we'll lose an opportunity to provide affordable energy choices to fuel our homes, businesses, and industries. President Trump won largely because of unexpected support in these 3 Great Lakes states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, where many voters turned to him because they were disillusioned by job losses in manufacturing. But these states and the other 5 that make up our shared economic region also rely on Canada to support roughly 2.2 million good-paying jobs. President Trump is a deal maker. He and those around him understand the political and economic importance of the Great Lakes and other cross-border regions like it. Let's use this knowledge and these relationships to rebuild NAFTA from the ground up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, and thank you, witnesses, for your testimony. We'll go into our questioning. We'll start off with Mr. Ritz with the Conservative Party. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Ritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your presentations today. It's one of those daunting tasks that we can't shirk or shy away from. And Bob, I'll just start with you. You mentioned that you and your counterparts in the U.S. and Mexico put together a statement basically saying how good this is and moving forward. Did you reach out to them, or did you? How did you make that happen?
Well, our industry is highly interconnected. It's a global industry.
Yeah.
Similar companies in all jurisdictions, so it was relatively easy. We're in regular, I would say, daily contact with our counterparts in those jurisdictions. We facilitated the availability of Canada's trade counselors to meet privately with our counterparts in the U.S. to get their perspectives. Why would they have the same position we do? So it's been relatively easy. What's good for them has been good for us, and vice versa.
Right, and that's
again, it's a message of a
great message to take to the leadership, the political leadership.
Completely integrated, complex supply chain, and if you try to take that apart now, it will disadvantage all of North America.
And that's typical. And the reason I want to start with you is foundational. It's typical of a lot of the industries that we're talking about across the spectrum, from agriculture right through to CAP, actually. And when you see a success story like that, are you guys then driven to do the same thing? Or maybe you've already started? There's strength in that, of course.
Yeah, from a steel industry perspective, I think we're quite close, actually, to a joint statement on shared negotiation priorities. Very similar to Bob, because
that's one of the issues that Trump has highlighted too, is steel.
Yeah, there is a significant focus in the U.S. administration on dumped and subsidized steel products, from Asia, and our challenge as Canadians going forward is going to be to acknowledge that, and we work with them very, very closely on these issues. We do not want to be caught up in the unintended or collateral damage of the Trump administration sort of taking action that he's promised to address those dumped.
But it's not a case of not making eye contact with the teacher because you didn't do your homework. In this case, we're going to have to face them down and make our case.
We have a great story to tell about integration.
Yeah, exactly. What happens, and it's so important that we don't get ahead over behind the U.S. and Mexico when it comes to regulations, red tape, taxation, all these different things. How do we get that message out? I mean, you can't have, geopolitically, you can't have a strong integrated NAFTA system that's going to go head-to-head with China and India and the emerging economies until you come to terms with streamlining of regulations and red tape and taxation. You know, with Trump going with a border tax, and we're going to have a carbon tax that nobody else has got, that puts everybody at a disadvantage. How do we start to smooth out some of those bumps using NAFTA as the vehicle to do it? Bob.
Sure. Well, there are some good examples of things we've already done. The Regulatory Cooperation Council, for one, has been very good. And it doesn't mean that Canada has to follow the U.S. lead. And that's a great example. The chemicals work that's been done under RCC, as that work sped up, the U.S. passed its only piece of major bipartisan legislation last year, which was the reform of the Toxic Substance Control Act. And voila, it looks very close to what Canada put in place more than 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. We led the way, and through that regulatory cooperation, they followed suit, and now we're drilling down into details where we can discover shared efficiencies and how we share our science and reach conclusions on toxicity of substances, et cetera. So there's a lot of good news about the cooperation that's there. So we can extend that. It doesn't mean that we have to water down what we do and follow the lead of the Americans. We have the capacity to lead. If I could just say on your second point, though, about competitiveness, it's something we worry about very much. I mentioned that the U.S. chemistry industry alone has seen over $250 billion of new investment.
Right.
Canada historically has a 10% share of that. We should have seen 30 new projects valued at $25 billion. We've seen about 3 or 4 projects valued at $2 billion. We've seen 1%. So already we're not competitive when it comes to attracting investment.
And once that slippage starts, there's no way to...
Well, I think the message we have is we reserve the right, just like in healthcare, to pursue whatever policy choices we want. We want to address carbon, we will address carbon. But make no mistake, it will impact competitiveness. So if that's the case, what are we doing to maintain the competitive position while we're focused on carbon policy? The notion that departments of environment nationally and provincially can somehow re-engineer our economy solo is hard to believe. If it is indeed a cross-cutting horizontal policy issue, then it requires a whole of government approach, and we're not
and buy-in from industry to actually make it work.
Yeah. You got 5 seconds left,
Okay,
so
thank you.
why don't we move on to Mr. Ramsey? You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of the presenters.
They come back to you. So.
I was ready. I can take 10 minutes.
I'm sure you can and would. Suki, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome all the witnesses here. My question will go to Mr. Nick Schultz. Okay. Thank you for correcting. Canada ranks in the top 10 world energy products, and the global demand is increasing with standard of living across the world, with economies progressing. When it comes to British Columbia, it's number 2 in the amount of natural gas produced among Canadian provinces. My question to you is this, because right now we rely mostly on the U.S., right? If we renegotiate NAFTA, how would that affect British Columbia and Canada? And also, would our priorities change when it comes to reliance on U.S.?
We wouldn't see renegotiation of NAFTA, assuming that we come out of it with essentially a free market policy for energy, as we did in 1988, as altering the basic market structure. The decisions of where product will go will be driven by relative market opportunities, relative competitiveness, and coming to the issue of British Columbia natural gas, there's a huge resource there that is looking for markets. We know that the markets in North America are not going to support the growth that people would like to see. So we will be looking offshore, but essentially it's the resource that will drive the search for the markets. And in the case of North America, free market policies are supporting that. The barriers to getting to market have a lot to do, not exclusively, but a lot to do in Canada with the complexity of the regulatory process and the timeline that it takes. There have been some market opportunities that have been lost because of the length of time it's taken to move things along. And when those windows close internationally, they don't open again for a while. So the International Energy Agency doesn't expect the next wave of LNG projects to occur until the mid-2020s. So it's possible that we're going to see a slow movement forward in Canada, and we would certainly hope to see projects continuing to move, but there have probably already been some opportunities lost.
What are those barriers, and what can be done in your opinion?
We need to find a way to address the issues that are causing the process to bog down, which relate to an approach to Aboriginal engagement that will be more satisfactory for all concerned than perhaps we have now. And of course, we need to always address the environment as we go through that. We have 2 reviews that have tabled reports recently that will probably make the process more complex rather than less complex. But at the federal level, but we do need to find a way to make the process move more efficiently, but also preserve the effectiveness of the process.
Thank you. And remaining minute to Ms. McEwen, you mentioned you believe in open trade and free trade helps us grow. All those factors that you mentioned that should be part of renegotiating NAFTA, how would it negatively, do you see it negatively affecting economic prosperity and economic development?
No. So if you're talking to an economist, the reason why free trade works, the idea with NAFTA, is that it was supposed to raise wages in Mexico so that then it would increase internal demand in Mexico, and so that would bring Mexico up to our standards. But wages have stagnated in Mexico. That hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened because there was a failure to enforce labor rights. So actually, I believe that this would be a path to shared prosperity. We would end up with better economic outcomes because you don't get the rising inequality. You don't get basically the exploitation of the environment and of workers.
Okay.
Mr. Dhaliwal, you've got 5 seconds. So
Good. Thank
move
you.
on to Ms. Ramsey. You officially now have the floor for 5 minutes.
All right, and I thank my colleague as his question was going the same way that I wanted to ask a question about. So you talked about the impact of trade shocks on working people in North America. You know, the labor community raised the alarm 25 years ago around serious issues, having the labor chapter, the environment chapter sit outside of the agreement. Some of those things have come to pass. You know, I think that Mr. Fisher spoke about that, about how working people have felt left out of trade and certainly have lost a lot of jobs in North America to trade, either going to Mexico or to southern U.S. from Canada. So what I want to ask about it are those trade shocks and about the CLC's perspective on the impact of NAFTA on working people in all of North America and what you think can be done to strengthen or modify NAFTA for working people.
Thank you. So first of all, I think we need to improve the labor chapter. So NAFTA was one of the first times that we had that kind of labor agreement alongside an agreement, and it was the labor unions in the United States that were pushing for this. And since then, they've kept pushing to improve agreements. And the best labor chapter so far, I think, would be a combination of CETAs and TPPs, actually. So where you're referring directly to the ILO Agenda for Decent Work, where you're referring to the core conventions, where you have an enforcement mechanism. And so that would involve strengthening Canada's national contact point. Right now, the contact point can offer good offices if there's a complaint against a specific company, but they can't make them come and have talks. They can't mediate a situation. So you don't get problems resolved, you know, kind of right away. You have to go through this like 8-year process. So the only time a labor chapter has had any effectiveness Well, it doesn't, basically. There's been a case in Guatemala where it took 8 years, and there wasn't a really strong outcome there. So the labor chapter itself is not enough, but it would be great to bring it into the agreement, to give it some teeth, and to refer to the ILO mechanisms that are available. Then I think we need to have legislation around due diligence for corporations, for multinational enterprises. And so that goes beyond just a corporate social responsibility statement to actual, global supply chains are difficult to follow. And we get crises like Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, where people don't even know who they're outsourcing to necessarily, right? And so the people at this end don't know what the exploitation is at that end. So to be able to follow global supply chains and to have it become normal that you have responsibility for that whole supply chain, and that you can't ignore the negative consequences of global supply chains.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Fisher. It was wonderful to attend the Great Lakes Economic Forum. It was a few weeks ago in Detroit, and it really highlighted, I think, what you've shared with us, the economic impact of that region. $6 trillion. We have the West Coast and the East Coast, but the heart of the country really is an economic powerhouse, I believe. So I want to talk to you a bit about something that was focused on at that conference, and this is the health of the Great Lakes. So if we talk about this shared space that we have, air and water, between the U.S. and Canada more specifically, but if we talk about the concerns of businesses on those lakes and the responsibility that they have too, I think of Sterling Fuels in Windsor right now, where there are numerous worker safety violations and a threat of fuel being spilled into the Great Lakes, or the DGR, right? This is something that we're facing in both of our countries. So my question to you really is about what can be done to improve NAFTA for the Great Lakes region, both environmentally and economically?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when you look at the Great Lakes region, obviously it has a long-standing history of cooperation when it comes to the environment, dating back to 1909 with the Boundary Waters Treaty and the creation of the International Joint Commission. And I think more recently on that timescale with the creation of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement in the 70s. And so we have, I think, a good benchmark of cooperation, and we have come a long way in terms of how we look at the Great Lakes from a economic standpoint, but also from an environmental protection sustainability standpoint. And I think there are some good lessons that we can take from that collaboration in this region, and how we might want to look at reforming the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and really trying to look at how we come together as three countries to determine the state of the environment across all three countries, and doing that in a meaningful way. I've been in and around this space for a long time, and
have to stop it there. So just
okay.
We'll move on to Ms. Lapointe. Sorry, Tracy.
Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. J'aurais une question, Monsieur.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, Mr. Schultz. I listened attentively to what you said earlier.
All one? Okay, excellent. Ms. Lapointe, start over again, please.
Merci, c'est gentil.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Mr. Schultz, I have a question for you. You said that oil products are highly integrated, and based on the report that you did, 99% of Canada's oil products are exported to the United States. Earlier, you also said that oil goes to the United States, to the Eastern Seaboard refineries. Do you include in that the fact that are you referring to Eastern U.S. or Eastern Canada when you say that?
I was referring to the Eastern Canadian refineries that are not connected to the pipeline system.
Québec, Ontario, Nouveau-Brunswick.
So Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick. So
Importe pour les raffineries.
Quebec imports. Do they import from the United States or from elsewhere?
Of crude oil imports into Eastern Canada are now coming from the United States. It was from offshore, from a variety of countries, including Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and so on. There are still imports from all of those offshore countries, but the proportion has changed, and now the United States is the major supplier. A few years ago, the United States exported no crude oil to Canada, so that's a new market for American producers. And I mentioned it as an example of how access to markets benefits all three countries in NAFTA in terms of what it means for people in Quebec and New Brunswick. It means that that the gasoline that they're putting in their cars is much of it comes from the United States, but some of it's also coming from Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, other places.
Merci. Vous avez tous parlé un peu des
Thank you. You all spoke a little bit about the rules of origin. It's a little bit of a tough situation to get one's head around. How do you intend to improve that?
We've been looking at this issue for our industry for some time. We did have some proposals that we made to U.S. Customs, but they have to work within the framework of the rules that are there. And they weren't able to accommodate our changes. So we do have some ideas for a more generic approach to dealing with our particular industry, but also some specific ideas for rules that relate to transformation of products, so that when you mix two products together, you move them into a different tariff category, and that would apply to movement of heavy oil from the oil sands, where you add light oil to it to make it light to move in the pipelines.
Merci. J'aurais une question pour M. Fisher.
I have a question for Mr. Fisher. You said earlier that there was a substantial trade deficit with Mexico. Canada and Mexico, well, we import many more of their products than we export. How do you intend to change NAFTA so that this trade deficit can be offset and improved?
Again, good question. I think the first thing that we need to do as Canadian policymakers is accept that Mexico is an important economy, a growing economy, and it's going to be even better positioned in the years to come to be a world leader in terms of global trade. And I think we need to be very much present in Mexico from a trade and investment standpoint, perhaps more than we have during the time of NAFTA. I don't think we're there as much as we should be. Certainly, the reform agenda that you've seen under President Peña Nieto is offered Canada an opportunity not only to be involved in the reform of the energy sector, but the reform of the financial services sector. And so, incredible opportunities to, I don't want to say Canadianize, perhaps, the reforms that we're seeing in Mexico, but there's a great opportunity to do just that and be more present in Mexico.
Merci. Vous avez aussi dit qu'il y avait des problèmes, il fallait moderniser.
You also said that there were problems modernizing the borders. There were certain trans-border or cross-border issues. If you could just speak to that issue.
Well, I think when you look at border management generally in the Great Lakes region, we still see areas, whether it's regulatory cooperation or customs cooperation, where we're not doing as much as we could be. So on the regulatory side, again, the more that we align and eliminate duplicative regulations, we create more clarity for businesses on both sides of the border, and we speed up business across the border. And then again, on the more of the customs facilitation side, it's recognizing that there's a security element to customs facilitation, but also a trade facilitation component, and making sure that we've got the systems in place that can do both.
Okay, we'll have to stop you there, but we're going to go into our second round. So Ms. Ludwig has the floor, so maybe we'll go with you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your presentations. I'm going to start my questions with Mr. Fisher. Just this past weekend, I actually held my 17th town hall. And at my town hall, I'm actually now attracting Americans to learn more about the goings-on regarding trade in particular. And some of those that attended were quite surprised to hear about how integrated our supply chains are, and that any disruption could mean job losses on both sides of the border. And I just want to start off with a quote. Some of its harshest critics concede that NAFTA should not be held entirely responsible for the recent loss of the U.S. industrial jobs. According to Scott, the Economic Policy Institute, over the past 2 decades, currency manipulation by about 20 countries, led by China, has inflated U.S. trade deficits, which, in combination with the lingering effects of the Great Recession, is largely responsible for the loss of more than 5 million U.S. jobs. So here's my question. How is the overall impact of NAFTA measured since trade and investment trends are influenced by numerous other economic variables such as economic growth, inflation, and currency fluctuations and manipulations.
Yeah, in a very simple response, I think the U.S. Congressional Service would agree with you wholeheartedly. In its report from February 2017, it said right up front that it's very hard to determine exactly what effect NAFTA has had on job creation because of all those other variables. So I think it's a very good point. We just don't know how many jobs have been created as a result of NAFTA. I think it is fair to say, though, that there is a positive net effect. But it's is it 1.5 million jobs or is it 9 million jobs? If you speak to the U.S. Department of Commerce, they'll say Trade with Canada supports directly roughly 1.5 million jobs. If you speak to officials in international trade, they'll say that Canadian exports to the United States support 9 million jobs. So there's a fundamental difference between how we view trade and job creation, not only with NAFTA, but more broadly with trade agreements around the world.
Great, thank you. So I definitely gather from this panel, for the most part, and from other panels before you, that any disruption to our integrated supply chain could put the risk of jobs on both sides, in fact, all three borders of the countries. What are the opportunities for greater integration? Not greater isolation and protectionist policies, but greater integration of our supply chain between all three nations so that we are a stronger trading region, not a weaker trading region. And what would the impact be if there was the destruction of NAFTA as it sits right now to the influence from other countries coming in, such as China, on trade and opportunities? So I might, I'll just... Anyone wants to start?
I'll take a first shot at it.
Thank you.
From a steel perspective, I'll start with your second question first. One of the greatest defenses that we have against unfair trade from China or other developing nations is the ability to serve customers appropriately and quickly with just-on-time product that goes across the border numerous times and has value added to it. So, our supply chain is very, very tight. You don't need to stock, maintain stock. We can customize. It's one of the great defenses that we have. I spoke very briefly in my remarks about strengthening the rules of origin. Specifically from a steel perspective, that would apply to manufactured goods containing steel. So there would be opportunity there if you adjusted the rules of origin to move to a melted and poured standard where the steel was actually produced in Canada or in the United States or in Mexico. You would grow employment that way. Right now, you can bring steel in from, for instance, Korea, apply a tariff shift to it, and it becomes sort of NAFTA compliant. You move away from that. You strengthen the rules of origin. You have an opportunity to create jobs and economic activity.
Thank you.
Just to take one example, the market is finding some great ways to do further integration. Where once upon a time we would look at raw materials from Canada going down to the United States to be converted, we've now got companies who are building pipelines to bring natural gas liquids up into Canada to convert into high-value petrochemicals and ship back those finished products at 10 and 20 times value back down to the United States. So the companies are finding good ways. Products that might have otherwise been flared as being in the way are now being used to make high-value products. And the integration goes on. We're now going to be, we're looking at some big investments to produce a grade of plastics that will be converted into lightweight auto parts and have a significant impact in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I see the opportunity for integration and greater net value both sides of the border.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there. Her time's up. So we'll move on to Dave Van Kester, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming. Fascinating discussion. Mr. Fisher, you're Canadian American. Are you an American or
Canadian?
You're Canadian. Okay. So I got to ask you this question. I wasn't able to attend. I think Tracy, maybe you were there. The border, pardon me, the bridge consultation. There was a briefing as to how the Gordie Howe Bridge was coming along. And of course, if we're going to have this trade, and we all know in the auto industry that it goes back and forth a number of times, how's that coming on the American side? What's your analysis?
Well, it's coming along. It's moving slow. My understanding with the president and CEO of the Bridge Authority, they're in the process of moving forward with their RFPs, and I think there's still outstanding questions in terms of financing for the Customs Plaza on the U.S. side. But all of those things are moving forward in due course, and I think at a quicker pace than perhaps they were 5 or 6 years ago. So it is moving forward. We need that capacity in the region. As you know, the Ambassador Bridge, is responsible for roughly a quarter of all trade, across the Canada-U.S. border. So we need that additional capacity, that additional redundancy in the region for moving goods if this region's going to grow.
So, we're hearing rumors that there's there's deliberate movement to stall this thing, and with the owner of the Ambassador Bridge and holding some property and such. Is there a willingness on the American side? It's the fear of a lot of us that the worst case scenario would be that Trump suddenly sees this as an opportunity to bring a lot of this industrial movement, and especially in the auto industry, to the American side. Is that something that's concerning you as well, too?
I guess I don't necessarily see it that way. The bridge was identified as a priority when the Prime Minister and the President met back in February. You've got a Republican governor, and Governor Schneider, who's very supportive of the project and has been working hand in glove with the Canadian government, the Ontario government, to moving this project forward. I think when I look at the wins and losses for the Maroon family in court, I think he's seen more losses than wins. And so I know that the process is just going to have to work itself out. But I do see that there's more people in favor of the project moving forward than not. And it's obviously a big infrastructure project, which aligns with the President's infrastructure agenda as well.
Dave, we had a fascinating discussion, I think, about maybe a year ago in my office, and you were giving me some of the exciting new movements in the chemistry industry and some of the new things that were taking place. Maybe you could just tell this committee too. What's stalling the Canadian side? You mentioned that there was much more investment on the American side. So what's the problem on this side?
Well, Minister Marneau has convened an Economic Advisory Council to try to get to the question of why is Canada lagging in global foreign direct investment, and why are we at sub 2% economic growth? And it's a very complicated story. I think the simple message is we simply don't try enough. When we look at our competitors in the United States, let me go back to where we are with free trade. By and large, I think most Canadians understand that firms operating in Canada have to compete for global market share. We know we have to trade our way to prosperity. We can't get there by consuming just ourselves. We accept that. What we haven't understood in Canada that other jurisdictions have is we also have to compete for investment share. So
we've got more. We have more trade agreements than the Americans. So we've done that. I know the former government certainly did open up those. And a lot of these companies we're talking about aren't Canadian companies. They're American companies. Why are they not investing in Canada if
we do not have a competitive landscape for investment competitiveness? Right? We don't have the conditions to attract global investment. There are many things that aren't working in our favor. Today in the U.S. Senate, there was a bill introduced that would provide significant federal supports to create the infrastructure in Pennsylvania to store the natural gas liquids that are abundantly available to facilitate the processing of that industry. So you have a partnership approach. It's not just financial, but there's a true partnership approach to try to intentionally develop the chemistry sector in states like Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Texas. And here, to be honest, it's more of a laissez-faire approach. If the investment comes, fine. If it doesn't, fine. That will hurt us in the long term if we don't get more aggressive and trying to figure out what we need to do to recruit that investment. I think today's introduction of Bill C-49 takes a number of important steps that will improve transportation competitiveness in Canada. That's a good step in the right direction. Many of our investing companies will tell us cost of transportation in Canada is the second most important factor they look at when deciding to invest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Kester. We'll move on to Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll compliment you on the masterful job you're doing of chairing this meeting. Thank you.
You only get 5 minutes, though.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone for being here today to obviously discuss this important topic. And I want to get right to the relationship here between us and the U.S., and especially when it comes to trade balances, whether they're the trade or the investment or services. But Joseph, I think the steel industry is roughly in balance, isn't it? Give or take 10% either way.
It's pretty much exact balance. It's 4.4 going from us to the United States, 4.45 coming back out in terms of billions.
So that's pretty good.
bang
So obviously, maintaining the strong relationship, I think, would be fair to say important to your industry. And we've also heard from your industry on another study we're doing, which is dealing with, of course, dumping of steel into the Canadian economy, of course, but it's really the North American economy. Mm-hmm. Do you see the relationship in NAFTA between Canada, U.S., and Mexico to some extent as a way of perhaps defending against that dumping? Is there a way we can work together in the sense of towards a common goal of making sure or doing what we can to make sure projects in North America are made with North American steel?
Yeah, I think it's essential. We've known for some time that steel dumping is the sort of primary trade area in the United States. This is something that the last administration was very keen on, and during the campaign, both sides raised it often. I go back to I believe that we offer a shared defense in NAFTA. We have done things like the trilateral agreement on enforcement to make sure that circumvented and subsidized steel is not coming into Canada and going into the United States, or to make sure that we're sharing information. But also, our ability to manufacture here in North America and meet the needs of our customers. Frankly, North American steel, we feel very strongly is of a higher quality. Our advanced manufacturing is of an excellent sort of standard. We feel like that's the basis on which we're most effective competing. Partnership with the United States from that perspective is essential. Yes.
So would you say it's fair to say that NAFTA can be more than just a trade agreement, but could also be a way of dealing with international trade irritants if we work together as opposed to separately?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's certainly a shared defense, and also when you look at our things that we're doing as a NAFTA bloc internationally, like our participation I mentioned in the G20 Forum on global overcapacity, that's something where the NAFTA governments have really driven that agenda on overcapacity and have used our combined influence, I think, for the good. And ultimately, we're hoping for a positive outcome. But yes, certainly domestically, certainly in terms of NAFTA, but also projecting that influence as a NAFTA bloc is crucial.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to move to Bob and talk about the chemistry industry for a little while. I think you mentioned it's a $53 billion industry. Is that that's the Canadian, or is that the
Canadian industry?
Canadian, good stuff. And how intertwined is the chemistry industry in North America? How essential is NAFTA to the success of your industry?
Entirely. So again, 75% of everything we produce in Canada is exported to the United States. $30+ billion, and then we bring $33 billion up. And Dave talked about this back and forth. It's much like the auto sector. Raw materials come up, we semi-process them, partially upgrade them, they get turned into a product that goes to somebody else, that turns into a product, and ultimately you've got a dashboard in a car or a rubber tire. We have a rubber plant in Sarnia. So it's a highly integrated, complex supply chain. To dismantle that again would be very difficult. I would just add one comment to what you just talked about with the NAFTA bloc. I think from the chemistry sector, we don't look at it that way. We look at the global environment, and we are very keen that Canada pursue rules-based fair trade that's mutually beneficial with those jurisdictions that we may have concerns with now. We think there's significant opportunities for Canada, especially given some of the threats we're seeing south of the border, significant opportunities to look for mutual advantage, a trade advantage with trade with China and other Asian nations.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty pressed for time, but I have time for one more, Mr. Chair.
You got 30 seconds.
Okay,
So.
Mr. Schultz, I just want to talk briefly about petroleum.
30 seconds.
So, the vast majority of what we send goes to the States. What we sell goes to the States, 99%, something like that. Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct.
But there's some value add. We import some value add to those exports from the U.S. as well?
The refined products go back and forth, and some of those manifest themselves through the petrochemical industry.
Right, so there's more than one border crossing potentially before it gets to the final consumer.
Yes, if you follow it in that way, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I'm going to take the the next few minutes as the chair of the Conservative Party slot, so I just have a few questions here. I'll start off with Angela. You talked about the disruption and loss of jobs because of trade and the impact that's had on different sectors. I'm kind of curious, have you done any studies that compared that to technology change versus trade and how that looks?
So there is a recent study by the IMF. It was in the news, and the headline in the news was that it wasn't trade, it was automation. But if you read the study, the researchers found that it's actually really difficult to disentangle the effects of automation and trade because where investment goes is partly driven by trade flows and where the cheap labor is and all of that stuff. So it's all very integrated.
Fair to say automation makes you more competitive in the global marketplace. So if you didn't have automation, you actually would have, in theory, possibility of no existence of that company being
exactly.
there.
So if you had one without the other, you don't know what the counterfactual is, right?
So do you think there needs to be more attention played to that aspect of automate? High-tech sectors making disruptive changes in a lot of sectors around the economy, and we think it's happening faster and faster. It used to be it'd take 10 years to see a new product come in and replace something old. Now it's done in a year, 2 years, and you see all of a sudden a whole sector displaced.
Right. So the research shows that communities or countries that respond successfully to both kinds of shocks have similar programs. And it's you have a social safety net so that you have bridging to retirement, you have active labor market policies, you have unemployment insurance that actually works for workers, right? Like it's not just a short-term solution and then your whole community is closed because the coal plant's done and you can't sell your house because it's not worth anything. So having a broad range of supports for workers that are negatively impacted by either kind of shock, I think, is important to be thinking about.
So it'd be fair to say then, Canada fairly is generally, if you look at our views on trades, Canadians, we're very pro-trade people. We understand it, we get it. But then we also have unemployment insurance. We have those safety nets that you talked about.
Don't have the active labor market policies. If you look at what Canada spends on active labor market, it's nothing.
But if you compare to what the U.S. has for...
Even the U.S., we spend less than the U.S.
Okay, but even what the U.S. has for unemployment insurance, for health care, those types of things.
We have health care, and I think that has helped us respond better to those shocks.
Is there anything in the trade agreements that the unions look at and say, okay, this doesn't allow us to expand into the U.S.? So if you wanted to take the Canadian Labour Congress and say, hey, why don't we actually go and try to organize some workers in New York State or down in Washington, or look at taking our union, make it more international? Is there any restrictions there in the trade agreement that prevents you from doing that? Or is that just basically a goodwill gesture? We won't step in your ground as long as you don't step on ours.
We do have international unions that are mostly cross-border between Canada and the United States, and they cooperate a fair amount. And they've been working together, again, to spread this message about how integrated the labor markets are. One of the important things that we could do in NAFTA is improving the labor mobility. So there are electricians who live in Windsor or nurses who live in Windsor that work across the border. So giving them the opportunity to do that in a way that makes sense, I think would be good for both economies, because sometimes there are contracts and they need lots of electricians on the Windsor side, sometimes they need lots on the Canadian side. So there are types of that. And then I think there are international rules about cross-border bargaining that we could work on separate from NAFTA.
Okay, so that'd be separate from NAFTA and side agreement of some sort. Okay, David, you're nodding your head. I think everybody in this room would say labor mobility is something that we'd all like to see addressed. So I think that's something we can put on the list and say, hey, make sure that's put in there. Correct?
I'd like to take it even one step further, that the services that support manufacturing trade or support goods trade and being able to provide after-sales service, the ability to move people around, the one thing that NAFTA could see some improvement on is on the people side and the movement. We've got global experts that move around the world much easier between Egypt and New Zealand than
even from Ontario to Quebec.
So we've got some things we can do to improve things so that the services associated with goods, which is becoming more and more a component of trade, are looked after. So that's a modernization aspect of this agreement that would benefit all three countries.
Okay. Joseph, one of my colleagues from Sault Ste. Marine, when I was down in the U.S. with him, talked about how their steel plant used U.S. ore, U.S. coal. Basically, everything was U.S., but it wasn't qualifying under Buy American. How do you guys work with the Americans on that type of situation, saying, wait a minute, this isn't Canadian steel, it's actually U.S. steel? Like, any suggestions on how to tackle that?
Well, yeah, I mentioned $1.5 billion in raw materials.
You have 15 seconds.
Yeah, $1.5 billion in raw materials coming into Canada, supporting transportation networks on places like the Great Lakes. Buy American is a very, very difficult nut to crack. We have, the Americans get full access to our infrastructure program. We can't access theirs. We've been at it for a long time.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut myself off. I'm over, so. And I know Linda's timing me, so. We'll move on to Mr. Ramsey. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the labor mobility is something that we can all agree to. Certainly down in Windsor, I'm on the border in Essex. We understand that very keenly. We see every week I have businesses calling me that can't get people across the border, that are unable to have skilled people go across. We also have a lot of academics who are not crossing the border because of the bans and things that have taken place in the U.S. So there's that kind of chill that's existing. So Mark, I wonder if you could speak a little bit, in this kind of interim period where we're waiting to see what happens in the next tweet or announcement from the States. There's this chill that's happened around businesses and investment. Can you speak to that in the Great Lakes region and the impact that you've seen?
Well, I haven't seen an immediate impact. The economy is moving along, but I think there's sort of two perspectives in the short term. One is make sure that we do no harm, and if we're going to reopen NAFTA, let's really try and look at what we can do on the ground in terms of some of those cross-border supply chains, the labor mobility, the infrastructure, the things that will really underpin the strength of the economy going forward.
Thank you. My last question is to Mr. Galimberti, and it's about the presidential executive order on Buy American with U.S. procurement. And you spoke about the infrastructure. Someone mentioned it in the U.S. Of course, we have our own infrastructure plans here in Canada, but I want to ask you how Canadian businesses in the steel sector would be affected by that executive order.
There's actually 3 ongoing investigations of the Department of Commerce triggered by various executive orders. There's the one on pipelines that we know about that would be essentially an extension of Buy American policies to private sector projects on pipelines specifically. That would be of significant concern, for instance, to one of our member producers, Evraz in Regina, that makes large diameter line pipe. So that would be significantly problematic were Canada to not receive a national exemption. The Buy America investigation, the process there in commerce is about finding loopholes and closing loopholes in existing Buy American policies, making sure that there are no inappropriate exemptions. We really need to sort of see how that one plays out. Any extension to Buy America is going to be de facto negative for the Canadian steel industry. What kind of exemptions they're after targeting, we're not really sure how we'd be implicated yet. And then there is the third commerce investigation on the 232 as relates national security. Mm-hmm. That is another one where it is critically important Canada be nationally exempted from whatever policy the U.S. Policy step the U.S. is considering. That investigation is being done on the basis of illegal or dumped and subsidized imports damaging the national security of the United States. We would make the case that given our mutually beneficial, balanced trade relationship, Canada has ample reason for an extension.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Brian. Welcome to the committee. You get 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, excuse me.
Next up.
I'm new. I'm new at this because I'm usually in that chair, so I don't usually get to ask questions. So I want to thank the committee members for allowing me to contribute today. I am just sort of a visitor today, but. My question, and we've sort of elaborated on it a little bit, and just want to give.
We allowed him through the border.
Yeah, exactly. I want to allow the witnesses to elaborate maybe a little bit. As we know, on January the 24th, 2017, the new president of the United States signed the executive order, Buy America, Hire America. And we understand what the intention of that executive order is to improve production in the United States. You've talked a little bit about what the impact would be on steel. I'm wondering if any of the other witnesses would like to kind of jump in terms of how it's going to impact their industry. But more importantly, what should we be doing about it? What, if anything, should the Canadian government, what action should we be taking with regard to this executive order? So maybe we'll start with Mr. Masterson.
Sure. So first of all, I talked about the large number of investments that went into the U.S. and the question from Ms. Ramsey about what does this mean? Are people going to want to invest more in the United States, perhaps? I think we're seeing two things. Those that are American companies are worried that they have to be seen to be doing the right thing. Global companies that are currently investing in the United States, they're very concerned about the proposed anti-trade measures because the facilities that are being built there are export-oriented. So that brings us back to what we should and shouldn't do in Canada. And I think the first thing we would say we shouldn't do is fight bad policy with bad policy. We all agree Buy America is not a good policy. Well, let's not do Buy Canadian. It's not going to work for us. So let's not make the same mistake. What we should do is certainly put more attention, which we've talked about for many, many years, put more attention on our market diversification and working on those trade agreements, especially with China. There are some that perhaps don't like it, but the energy sector remains the backbone of the country. There are ample customers for our product. The only thing that's holding us back from getting those products there and then all the other downstream products is our policy environment. We have to come to grips with a way that we can move our products, especially our energy and related products, off the West Coast to the large growing Asian markets I talked about. If we do those things, let Mr. Trump set whatever policies he wants. We'll have diversified ourselves and remain competitive.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Schultz, would you add anything to that?
I would share those comments. I mean, there are two aspects to the Buy America thing. One is for government procurement, but the other piece is the creep into the private sector, which is, of course, particularly worrying. I believe the government of Canada is pursuing a sort of a targeted kind of approach to that, but in a very consistent and principled way. So we do support that. We too would seek market diversification, but that is proving a challenge. There was an oil pipeline proposal that would have provided that in Northern Gateway, but that doesn't fit with the current government's priorities. So that's not going anywhere. And I was talking earlier about the challenges with getting natural gas to offshore markets, which are a combination of market conditions and regulatory delay.
Thank you. And Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, I think just to add very quickly, market diversification is obviously important for any international trade policy. It certainly doesn't happen overnight, but I think in the long term, as an export economy, it can only help. You know, with respect to the United States around Buy America, High American, border adjustment taxes, what have you. I think we've been doing the right things in terms of engaging Congress directly, both the House and the Senate. We need to be doing more of that on a legislator to legislator basis, Prime Minister to President, Governor to Governor, Governor to Premier. But we also need to be getting business and business engaged. You know, we've got a lot of counterparts on this panel here that have subsidiaries and parent companies in the United States. If they truly believe in the strength of the supply chains and the clusters that exist across the border, there's no reason why Dow, DuPont, Walmart, all the companies that are active in Canada and the United States shouldn't be, in Congress, speaking to the benefits of the joint economic partnership that we have between the United States and Canada. So, on the government-to-government side, the legislative side, we're doing fine. I think we could amplify that by having more business-to-business interaction and having them engaged in that conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I have any time left, I'm done.
You're done, actually.
Oh, okay.
Actually, colleagues, this finishes our second round, but we do have lots of time on the clock. Now, I know Mr. Peterson said you wanted to go on camera for a few minutes at the end, so we'll allow time for that. I thought maybe we'd go into the third round and just go 2 minutes instead of 5 minutes, and that way, if you had a few more questions, I know it seems like everybody does, we'll do that, and then from there we'll finish off and then go into camera. So. We'll start off with Mr. Van Kester, and then it'll go to the Liberals, and then it'll go to Ms. Ramsey. We'll finish off the third round.
Thank you. I just got a quick question, Mr. Schultz. You stated something that I wasn't aware of, that the East Coast is now primarily supplied by the U.S. Is that a result of fracking, or it's?
It's the growth in the light oil production in the United States, which is the result of bringing the advanced technologies to bear, which involve the multiple horizontal drilling and multiple fracturing.
So where's most of that taking place? Like in Pennsylvania, or are they bringing it all the way in from out west?
There are a couple of places, but initially it was in North Dakota. And
so they can bring that all the way to the East Coast. Is that because of pipeline or our lack of pipelines? And I'm curious, what about the Hibernia, those oil fields? Are they not? Is it not cheaper to bring it in by ship to Montreal, places like that?
The production from Hibernia was already in the marketplace, so this U.S. Oil that's been coming into the market in recent years is displacing the offshore production that was in the marketplace. It can come by rail. Some of it could come by marine movement from the U.S. Gulf Coast, which would involve it getting to the Gulf Coast either by rail, barge, or pipeline, or some combination of those three, depending on where the oil fields are located.
Wow, that's all I got.
Thank you, Van Kester. Ms. Ludwig, you have the floor. Approximately 2 minutes.
Thank you. There is no trade-off between border security and efficiency. How can we better use technology to efficiently pre-clear our cargo and our citizens? Some of the examples that were offered today were alignment, some elimination of red tape. Some of the other committee witnesses have talked about harmonization, e-manifest for freight forwarders, border wait times, applications, or an app, electronic border interchange. Can you offer some suggestions of how we can better use technology, considering that when NAFTA was first drafted, there was no internet? Thank you.
Al Gore hadn't invented it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can start, I think the multimodal pre-clearance agreement that was initiated and signed under Prime Minister Harper and President Obama and I think moved into law more recently shows great promise in terms of opening up the border from a technology standpoint, particularly on the movement of people, but also goods. I know cargo is going to be the second step that comes. It's going to be people first and then cargo. But that really provides not only the legal framework for allowing that to take hold, but I think it provides great promise from a technology standpoint in terms of single window and what have you. When you combine those things together, that's where you can really see some acceleration in terms of the movement of goods and people across the border.
And just on that, how would we connect Mexico with that?
Well, that's always $1 million question. I think and when I get back to the two speeds economy, we're always seem to be in a different place in terms of where we are in our conversations with the U.S. versus the U.S. and Mexico. Saying that, though, and we've seen this on the regulatory side, I think there's lots that Mexico can learn on the regulatory cooperation side and bringing them along perhaps faster and learning from our mistakes if we get them to the table early. And so I think if there's a way to include them in that conversation around border facilitation and multimodal preclearance, we should be doing that now, not waiting until we think they're right for that conversation or ready for that conversation.
Thank you.
You're pretty well done, 2 minutes. So.
Okay.
Ms. Ramsey, 2 minutes.
You've given us all, great examples of ways that we could improve NAFTA today, and I think there's a strong push for that. But I also think there's an opportunity for offensive asks. So I want to ask Ms. McEwen if she could elaborate on what she sees as offensive asks, and if she could speak about, right-to-work legislation in the states and how we could approach that.
Yeah, so labor unions in the past have suggested that right-to-work legislation is actually a subsidy to corporations, and so that it's an unfair subsidy. So we could launch, possibly under NAFTA or under the WTO, a complaint regarding how the United States unfairly subsidizes companies by allowing them to pay workers less, because that's what ends up happening in right-to-work states. And it's also a violation of the right to organize, the ILO conventions around the right to organize and freedom of association and all of those things. So that could be something that we could raise as an offensive ask and say, like, look, if you can't ratify 98, if you can't improve the labor chapter, this is what we're going to have to do, because Trump and Obama both talked about improving the labor chapter for labor, but ended up not doing it because they're as much in violation as Mexico is.
Something else that I'm not sure if it was mentioned, and I apologize for coming in late, but the Trade Committee is traveling to the U.S. You mentioned, Mark, we should be doing business to business. I think that needs to happen at the labor level as well, all levels. But we have been traveling, and we're heading to Detroit, Illinois, and D.C. in a few weeks. So we have been to California, we've been to the West Coast, and so we certainly are doing our part on that as well, trying to share that story and travel with it.
And certainly if the committee wants help setting up meetings with labor and civil society, wherever you go, we can work with the AFL-CIO and help make those connections, because unions like LIONA and other unions are doing a really good job, I think, on steel, making that case.
That actually might be a good idea when we do the Midwest. If we do the Midwest and into Mexico, there's lots of people in the Midwest that are showing concern. They're feeling left out. So, well, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I think the committee's planning to do that in the fall. So, well, witnesses, thank you so much for tolerating our being a little tardy this afternoon, and then your great testimony here this afternoon. I'm going to actually suspend the session right now for 2 minutes before we go into camera, and then I'll ask all the members. So we'll ask everybody to clear the room before we go into camera, and please travel safe as you head home. Thanks.